This video is presented to you by LiveTimeMedia. Follow us on Instagram and YouTube for great content in multimedia projects.
Os famosos táxis.
Yes, we got our tickets to get on the ferry towards Baja California and continue our journey on bicycle touring the American continent, now on Californian lands. By the way, my name is Luis Antonio, and I'm a fellow bicycle tourist born in South America, Brazil. In the last 5 years of my life, I've been bicycle touring through 15 countries in the American continent, having bicycled more or less 15,000 miles. I'm so excited to start my Californian leg of the tour and also to share my experiences with English speaking friends. That new video series I'm launching now is gonna be essentially the improvement and translation of many of videos that I produced from 2019 through 2021. Departing from Mazatlan, the ferry takes about 12 to 14 hours to arrive in La Paz, the capital of Baja California Sur. We paid about $50 for the trip, and that was kind of fancy for us because our bicycle touring lifestyle was much more simple, and all that lights and structures that they got in the ferry made the trip something like special for us. Yes, and I tell us because I was traveling at that time with a fellow friend from Brazil, and his name was Guillermo. We traveled from Guadalajara all the way to Mazatlan with the idea of crossing together the deserts of Baja California all the way to the border with United States, and from there take separate paths. So it was kind of a beginning of a great new journey through an unknown desert. As soon as Baja Ferry left us in the port in La Paz, Baja California, I felt so happy. It was the beginning of a new journey on California lands. That's how I felt. You can tell from the beginning that inland Mexico it's pretty much different from Baja. This comes from back in the days when Spain used to own Mexican lands, not only Baja California but also the state of California and Nevada, which is now from United States, was back then Mexican territories. Although the Spanish crown didn't care too much about this area. They weren't commercially interested in that lands. So they left the exploration run by the Catholic Church under the Jesuits' missions. That's how you can see that pretty much many towns from Baja California and the state of California are named with Spanish names, Spanish saints like La Paz or San Felipe or San Diego, Los Angeles, San Clemente, San Francisco, that's Santa Barbara. That's just some examples of Spanish towns. Even on my first miles bicycle, I could notice it's a bit more organized town as I could feel, and could see like structures like skate parks, which is not very used to see in inland Mexico as I'm seeing just now.
Sí, o si ustedes visitan a San Francisco algún día, tiene espacio ahí.
Ah, a lo mejor por allá te veo.
Si quieres navegar.
Oh, bueno, sí, yo quiero aprender.
Sí. Me gustaría recibir ciclistas en el barco, pero vamos a tener que ver cómo hacer con las bicicletas.
Con Tuli.
Almacenadas aquí.
Sí. Sí, fue un placer grande y ellos...
Ya nos vemos allá.
Sí, exacto. Sí, si ustedes necesitan casa, para mí.
¿Quieres que lo haga o...?
Sí, por favor.
We got the opportunity to know bicycle tourists from all over the world. We made friendship with friends from England, from France, from Argentina, from California. So, enjoying all this great time, we spent a couple of days visiting beautiful places around La Paz, like for example Playa El Saltillo, which is one of a kind beach I've never been in my life, with a very big salted water that makes you float.
Second of March of 2020, Giga and I were on the road towards California. The road sign shows about 1,000 miles from La Paz, where we were departing, all the way to Tijuana, the northernmost frontier between Mexico and United States. We were so happy. We started the first day about midday, accompanied by a new friend we made on our party days in La Paz, Natalie from Texas. Very nice to meet you if you ever see this video. Very of a vibe Giga and I were having, the feeling of freedom of going to the unknown desert was great. First night we realized what was to come. We didn't really found nothing but wide spaces for camping. We didn't have so much provisions, so we improvised a dinner. But the vibes were so high that we are stoked. First night sleeping in the desert felt great. It was the beginning of our new routine. Waking up with the sunshine, with the weather being warmed by that beautiful light, and waking up always in a kind of a new place. We would not find a camping spot until almost night. So waking up in all this new environment was like kind of a new discovery. And we felt very safe, especially being in two people. So we are enjoying our times, even though with a little bit of rain. It was a hard day. Just in the morning, the wind started blowing in our face, and as the day went by, it got stronger. We couldn't deny a hitchhike we got offered for about 80 miles until Ciudad Insurgentes. Meus amigos, Michel, Dominique.
Bonjour.
We were early birds in March 4th of 2020. Departing from Ciudad Insurgentes, we approached a new strategy. We started to bicycle very early to avoid the headwinds and cross as fast as possible the plains. As soon as we got to the crossroad, we would be bicycling towards east, towards the Corte where the winds were slower and more pleasant to bike, along with some small mountain ranges.
Todos os amigos ciclistas do mundo.
Para os amigos cicloviajantes na estrada aqui, Tijuana.
Bom dia. Vamos a Panamá.
Ah,
Canadá, Panamá.
de Canadá, Panamá,
De Tijuana a Los Cabos.
de Tijuana a Los Cabos.
Ah, ok.
Esse aí você já conhece?
Yeah, claro. There's a restaurant.
Following March 4th and March 5th, we were much more used to the desert terrain. We understood that the best thing was to carry a lot of food and water. Each of us would carry about almost 2 gallons of water and also have food like 4 meals or 5 meals, independently if it was breakfast, dinner, or lunch. This way, we felt safer to ride into this big desert because we could basically stop at any place we liked and have a good meal and a good rest at the end of the day. Baja California is one of a kind. The peninsula that has about 1,000-mile extensions between Cabo San Lucas and south and Tijuana, the north end. All this territory lives under severe weather conditions, with temperatures ranging between 100 degrees all the way to 30, and even sometimes in the same day. This great desert, it can be divided into 3 parts between the Gulf, the South Gulf, the central called Vizcaino Desert, and in the northern part called the San Felipe Desert. The plants and the animals that live under these conditions have to adapt themselves. Maybe that's why some of them look so scary. The plants have many spines and hairs that make possible them to have big water reservoirs.
and avoid the visit of animals and also the sun radiation, just with that big spines. It's very beautiful to observe all of this while riding these deserts on a human pace. The days traveling in Baja were very pleasant. I could feel all that cowboy spirit from back in the days. I was exactly like I read in the comics, when cowboys would travel from town to town riding their horses for days and days and having to stop each 20 or 30 miles to rest, to eat, and to continue their trip, bringing something or looking for something else on each travel being a great adventure. We would gather wood very easily, as the many of the plants are dry. I found very funny that some plants were like half live and half dead. Some parts of it would live and be green, but other parts be just the skeleton, which I would step, and as I step, and all its parts break, and just a small amount would make possible us to light some fire that would heat us water for tea, soups, and any kind of food that we desired and we had in our bags. Loreto was once the capital of the Great Californias, the starting point where the Jesuits would arrive from inland Mexico, crossing the Cortes Sea all the way to the shores of the California Peninsula. We had a 2 days rest with the firefighters. They kindly received us in the station, and we could use the kitchen and rest in the common areas. So this way we didn't had to pay for accommodation, and we were good and rested to keep our journey towards crossing this great desert of the California. Even though Baja California is still nowadays an inclement and lonely desert at some points, over the last 100 years, the peninsula has seen its human population grow tremendously. This impacted a lot in the wildlife and all the vegetation around. The first recordings of human habitating the peninsula is about 12,000 years ago. Since then, the humans learned how to adapt and to live on this very harsh climate.
was just in the end of the 18th century when the Jesuits started exploring the California peninsula that we had some kind of documentation about its territory and the people that live in it. Was estimated by them that about 40,000 to 50,000 indigenous people would live in this area. And still nowadays, all the Baja California is not so much populated in comparison as Inland Mexico or the state of California. So it's very nice to observe the wildlife, to watch coyotes running after rabbits and them living and trying to strive and find their food, birds, and all kinds of peculiar animals. Not to mention the richness of the marine wildlife. Baja California is known to be the nesting place for big mammals, such as a variety of whales species. 8th of March of 2020 is probably the first day in my life I saw an American-style campground. All those RVs, converted vans, pickups, campers, SUV, loaded with all kinds of gears for leisure and for radical activities, was not a common sightseeing down south in the American continent. Really, what I mostly see along the overlanders, despite one or another European cars, was mostly that Volkswagen combis, which are easily breakable and cannot carry that many weight. All the style of American camping, it's very patronized and very common to see it all over the US country, but was my first contact with it, and I confess I was very amused by the amount of things you can take on overland travel. Was in the very uplifting and beautiful town of Mulegé that we got to know our first oasis in Baja California. The most interesting thing about this town is the jail without gates, which was operated by the beginning of the 20th century when Porfirio Diaz was the president of Mexico. In this jail, the prisoners were allowed to go out of their cells and live their life in the town, to participate in the community, working as fishermen or carpentry, exercising some kind of activity for the community. It was a very useful model because any prisoner could ever think of escaping, as Mulegé lies in the only source of fresh water in any direction you could go.
Cada dia mais perto da fronteira, rumo Estados Unidos, bora que bora!
Santa Rosalia is quite of a curious town, being one of the most populated little towns in Baja California Sur. Santa Rosalia has this air of a ghost mining town. That's because a French company got 100-year concessions back in the days to explore copper in the region. So they built a town all around the mining and with that French English mining style. Baja California doesn't have wood for building houses, but they imported those materials, so they built all houses on wood. Nowadays, it's still a big problem because as these materials year by year are deteriorated, parts of town looks like abandoned, while other parts are still vivid and even a little bit touristic. There is many fires that happen around because of these wood structures that are not really the best option to build houses in Baja California, as the weather is very dry and very common to have wildfires around, especially in a mining environment. Nowadays, when they have to refurbish and renew the constructions, they build the houses looking like they are built on wood, but in fact they are built with other more sustainable, cheaper materials. Still nowadays, the mining continues under a South Korean concession. Maybe that's why the city is so well trafficked. The copper mining is very important to the development of technology, but also makes very bad to the environment. I continued my trip up hills. In the way, I had to change my tires, which was very hard to get a replacement because there is not many shops in the region, and I needed a specific tire to fit my 26-inch. Eventually, a friend that lives in the region found one for me and drove all the way to where I was on the road and gave me. This saved me a lot because without tires you cannot get anywhere.
Agora vem a descida, só 35 quilômetros, pura barrada.
2 days traveling from Mulegé, we got to encounter our next oasis. Nowadays, with good bicycles on good road conditions and some towns in the middle, it's much easier to make all the way from Mulegé to San Ignacio. But you can imagine back in the days when you had to go all the way through dirty roads on uncertain paths with no other structures in between the towns. Would be very hard, really, to anyone leave Mulegé and try to escape towards San Ignacio. I found very beautiful and very interesting that the climate looked pretty much different from everything we experienced, with much more green and water. There is something special about this environment, and I think it's the combination of the volcanic soil, which is known to be very fertile, and the abundance of fresh water that comes from under the earth. The Jesuits first arrived here by the year 1716, about in the beginning of the 18th century. The first thing they did was a church made of wood sticks, and since that time they knew that this would be the hub for exploring the whole Baja California. Not only because of the geographic position, as San Ignacio is located right in the middle, but also because of being a very big source of fresh water, making possible to grow all kinds of vegetables and fruitiferous trees. These lands were one of the most dense populated by the Native American people. It was interesting also for the church to establish their headquarters because one of their main interests was to colonize and to introduce the European lifestyle and way of thinking on the Native American people. This church behind me had its construction finished by 1786, 18,000s year. All the indigenous people were mostly vanished. By the beginning of the 19th century, people from San Ignacio would identify themselves more similar to the inlander Mexicans than to the native Baja Californians. This town ended up being a showcase of what was the role model of living oriented by the Catholic principles and Spanish lifestyle, and set an example on a so far land in the middle of literally nothing.
Buen viaje, de nada.
Chao.
Que Dios bendiga y nos acompañe.
Gracias igualmente.
The road to Guerrero Negro on the next couple of days of riding wasn't so pleasant. We faced a lot of counterwinds, and we decided to hang out a couple of days in a hotel room. We also got the notice about a new virus that they were talking about, some kind of pandemic that could stop the whole road in the next few days. Between some rain, some headwinds, and some flooded landscapes, we made our way to Guerrero Negro. And leaving after hanging tight one more night in the fire station, we we left the next day with a sunny perspective of life. Basically, on the middle of the road between where we started and the border with US, the great objective which I was seeking. Was such a pleasant moment. I didn't know really what expected. I was certain that great things were to come. Crossing the border to US was exciting but a bit frightening as well, as I had many questions in my head. And as we could get service in any shop we stop or any touristic place we got on the road which were few, we were hearing stories about some kind of pandemic that never had happened before and that was threatening the life of people. And because of that, they were even thinking about closing the borders of many countries and stopping the movement of people around the road. To be honest, we didn't care too much about it as we are having so much fun on that everyday new experiences riding through that beautiful and fulfilling nature of Baja California. Viajando aqui no deserto, sob esse sol inclemente aqui, passou um pessoal de carro aí, umas boas almas, me deram uma cervejinha. Vou fazer o quê? Tem que tomar, né? Um brinde a Baja Califórnia. The road sign shows 220 kilometers to the next gas station. About 180 miles to the next populated spot. This means the next place where we can find water or some shelter or some food. It was about 3/4 of the day done, and as I saw the sign, I looked to my water bottles and I saw them pretty empty. I had not much options than to keep riding deep in the desert. Eventually I would find something. Certainly not a natural stream of water. Guillermo was a bit ahead of me, but I didn't mind it. I knew he would stop as soon as he found something. We got lucky that night and found a small restaurant that runs mainly for the truck drivers, providing meals. The people that work there live there because it is so far from anything that you cannot just commute from your work to your house. So we got helped by the ladies that worked in the restaurant, and they let us camp on the side of the restaurant, protected from the wind, and also fed us, not asking even a peso in exchange of such a kindness. As we are in the Chapala Lake, we encountered a crossroad. We decided to take the right side and cross all the way the peninsula towards the Cortes Sea, that mass of water that is between the England, Mexico and the peninsula. We took that decision because we are hoping for a less trafficked roads and also pleasant landscapes along mountain ranges. Bicycling further towards Cortes Sea, we found later that same day of 16th of March a market. Well, we took opportunity and got all the provisions we could. We would buy things like cheese, bread or tortillas, tostadas, which is used very cheap and used to find in Mexico, and have like fruits like my preferably would be always bananas, either being also apples or whatever, really cheap. Also we would look for soy based foods that could last a couple of days inside the panniers, like tofu or soy textures that they call soy meat in some places, and eggs as well. Anything that we found cheap really and had a lot of calories. One of the most important things was to cook well. After a whole day of bicycling, one of our biggest pleasures would be to sit by the fire and make a nice meal. We would get things from our panniers like vegetables and like garlic or onions, and always use abundance of seasonings. If we were lucky, like today, we were able to find a market and score things like meat, seafood, and this way we could carry for later that day cooking. We're traveling on bicycle, we don't carry a fridge or can store food or protect from animals to getting it at night. So we have to be careful with our selections so they can last in our panniers and we always have food available. One of the worst things when you are bicycle touring is not having food. It's the fuel. It's what makes you go forward and feel happy. Eating good was a high priority. We also always like to cook our food better than buying in a restaurant or something, for two simple reasons. First is that we didn't carry money. All this trip of like 3 weeks and a half, I spent about $50. because we had to hang 2 days in a hotel and we had costs buying that food. But other than that, we got uh, our budget very cheap, and one of the main reasons is because we cook. And also the second reason that we cook it is because we like it to eat our own food with our tastes and our seasoning. Been traveling many years, like Guillermo and me were, makes us value the tastes of our hometowns and the quality of the food, because not always you find good food. Sometimes there is very good restaurants, but in some places the restaurants are very bad, and even the food is not well done and can make you sick. So because of that, cooking is very important uh, in the in a trip like that. That day of March 18, 2020, when I hopped on my bicycle, leaving that crazy bar called Paris, I never felt so good bicycling in my life. Even though I didn't take a shower for at least a week, or I was kind of very burned from the sun and tired from bicycling the last 3.5 weeks in desert landscapes. I had this frightening feeling in my belly. It was just now, after 5 years riding up to 15,000 miles along 14 different countries in the American continent, that I was getting to the United States border. That border was the mark of a big change in my life. I heard many stories about how was the life in US. Good stories, bad stories. I really didn't know what to expect. I knew it was all a different language and all new system and a much stronger currency. And as I could bicycle north, I was noticing a lot of changes, like people living in cars and metal trailers and all kinds of machineries that I never seen in my life before. I had that feeling that I was diving into a Mad Max movie. Desert landscapes, very harsh climate, extreme conditions. Everything was a new vibe. The days between 19 and 21 of March were were very atypical. We could, when we arrived in San Felipe, after several weeks riding the desert with no phone service or watching the news, we figured it out. A worldwide pandemic happening and was threatening to close borders and limit the traffic of people all over the world. We got notice that the United States President Donald Trump was considering to close the border to non-essential travel. which was kind of the category that Guillermo and I was in, because we had at the time tourist visas to get into the country. So because of that, we are very uncertain if we could really cross the border or not. We stayed in a backyard of a family that was supporting us, and because of all the happenings, they instructed us to never leave that place and stay inside all the time, and try to get all the food we could from the supermarkets, and avoid walking into town or avoiding any public spaces, because at that moment was very uncertain and unknown what uh, really a pandemic means, or what would happen in the next weeks. All this news just added a little bit of more frightening and uncertainty to our plans.
Ahí si se pueden, se pasan de una vez para Estados Unidos.
Sim, seu amigo firminho aqui levou a gente por 150 quilômetros no deserto aí. Estamos 2 quilômetros da fronteira dos Estados Unidos.
2 kilómetros.
Sim, 2 quilômetros. Muito perto.
Órale.
Já, em breve vamos cruzar. Welcome to Tijuana. Aí estamos, fronteira México-Estados Unidos. É isso aí. Atrás desse alambrado aí preto já é território estadunidense.
On that day of 22 of March of 2020, I saw for the first time in my life that giant fence. That black giant fence that divides the whole continent into the North America and South America. That divides a lifestyle, a whole new different way of living. I had a lot of mixed feelings because I don't know how long I would still be on this side of the fence.
Olá Luis Antonio, a fronteira dos Estados Unidos is closed till June 21st of 2020. Thanks for visiting Mexicali.
In the 8 following weeks after we first arrived in Mexicali, our life routine changed drastically. From traveling alongside desert landscapes, enjoying life at its fullest, and connecting with nature and having good experiences overall, we got stuck in one of the hottest places in the world, a desert city called Mexicali. Thankfully to local friends, during all this time I could have work and a comfortable place to sleep and good food on this long and infinite wait. Well, we were waiting because while we are crossing the peninsula of Baja California in the last 4 weeks and enjoying all the solitude in the desert, a road wild health pandemic just happened. Because of that, many restrictions were imposed to traveling, such as crossing the border by walk holding a tourist visa, which was our case. Well, Mexicali is kind of a crazy city, very different from other cities of Mexico. Being established only in the 20th century, with the projects of irrigation of the Colorado River that made possible the development of an industrial textile city right in the border of US called Mexicali, the mix between Mexico and California. This city is kind of strange because it has dumpsters all over the city with all kinds of trash, and you actually can see people living inside the trash, making their houses out of scrapes. There is many immigrants that come to this town with the hopes of crossing the border towards US, many of them trying to follow their paths towards Canada, looking for better lives far from their home countries where they possibly were finding much difficulties in developing. Yeah, so all this environment I spend many days with a lot of uncertainty if I could ever continue my tourist project of getting to know the great American continent. Thank you very much for following this trip all the way to the border. Will I make it the other side? What will be my impressions? How I will be able to overcome all the situation and still have a great time on my bicycle riding the Great Americas. Subscribe the channel and watch the other videos. Now many of them are just in Portuguese, but I'm working hard to translating the best contents to the English language. Thank you so much again and see you soon, guys.